one of the interesting histories of the God concept, which I think is drawn out in a book called The History of God. I can't remember the author, but I'll find out. It may not be in there, but I think it is. Is a kind of geometrical understanding of God, as opposed to a simple anthropomorphic model. And my understanding of that is that it begins with Parmenides. I think that's where it begins. Possibly under the influence of that kind of special status awarded to geometry by the Pythagorean Brotherhood and mathematicians of the pre-Socratic Greece. And what I understand is that Parmenides suggested is that God is by nature perfect, and therefore, if represented geometrically, if we are trying to understand the concept of God, difficult concept to understand, and if we have to use geometry to understand that, then a representation of God would be the sphere, because the sphere has a kind of perfection. Each point on its surface is equidistant from its centre. It has neither an odd nor an even number of sides, angles, corners, facets, etc. And it has no surface features at all. Every point on its surface can be reached by every other point on its surface without undergoing any sort of transition across a corner or anything like that. So there's a number of features that the sphere has, or at least had Parmenides, which suggested that was the kind of most perfect shape, and hence the best representative of God. That idea of the sphere as being a symbol for God is picked up again, I think, by the Neoplatonists. And the name that springs to my mind is Plotinus, who I think was writing in, I'm guessing here, but I think it was something like the 11th century, but it might have been earlier. And he came up with this idea, or this development of that concept, relating to what I've just said about the fact that every point on the surface of the sphere is equidistant from the central point. And what Plotinus points out from that is that taking a central point, a sphere of any size, or a circle of any size, he also talked about circles, a circle of any size or a sphere of any size can be derived, and that's an obviousness. If you put a point on a piece of paper, put one end of a set of compasses on that point, then you can draw a circle of any size, but it's always centered upon that point, and extending that into 3 dimensions, a sphere of any size can be derived from a single point. And for Plotinus, that relationship between point and periphery of a sphere of infinite dimension, or any possible dimension, is kind of equivalent to a relationship between the individual soul and God. Okay, so that's taking it from Parmenides through to Plotinus. They all begin with P, these people, actually. I'm going on to Pascal, I hadn't noticed that before. Anyway, at the time that Plotinus is writing, of course, and really right up until the 16th century, that sphere is sort of confirmed or reinforced by the evidence of one's senses. And I'm looking around here right now, for example. It does feel, or at least it appears, that I am at the centre of my little world, as Ivor Cutler sings, and there is a kind of ball of sky above me. And that was, of course, the model of the universe in those times. It was an Earth-centred universe in which there was a crystalline sphere, in some models more than one, but at least one crystalline sphere enclosing it, a bit like a snow globe, and God as the ultimate circumference around that model. So we are cosseted and held at the centre of the snow globe, held in God's hands, if you like. So that, so in that evolution of the model from Parmenides up to Plotinus, the observations are confirmed by the senses, if you like. After the Copernican revolutions of the 16th and 17th centuries, in which a new understanding of space is produced, particularly characterized by Newton and Descartes, perhaps, but also by Kepler and Galileo and the rest, in which the snow globe model is shattered in favour of a kind of infinite space model in which there is no centre, then you have to, by dint of necessity, modify the model. And Pascal, the third P in this trilogy, writes about that. He's somewhat horrified, I think, by Newtonian space, but he writes about that, and he famously describes this new universe as still a sphere, but it's a sphere in which the centre is everywhere and the periphery is nowhere, which is almost impossible to imagine, but still quite beautiful, I think. And it's interesting how what he does is he repurposes the sphere model, the sphere of Parmenides and the sphere of Plotinus, but find a place in the sphere as a part of Newtonian space. Extraordinarily, the centre part of the centre is where we actually stand, but the idea that the